Bem, hoje vamos começar por falar. O primeiro tema é a voz da mídia no avanço do movimento feminista pela justiça da dívida e para tal, portanto, eu passo a convidar as palestrantes a este tema, começando pela Onchabalala. Onchabalala, que é presidente da Rede Parlamentar Africana, por favor, gostávamos de tê-la aqui em frente. Muito obrigada. De igual modo, faço a Risca Kopman, não sei se pronunciei bem, se não, peço desculpas. Portanto, ela é oficial de pesquisas e defesa de políticas, finanças públicas e privadas internacionais. Agora, eu terei que me juntar às nossas palestrantes, não sei se posso levar este microfone, já está em condições ou não. Bom dia, obrigada por cá estarem conosco. Bem, nós ao falarmos da voz da mídia no avanço do movimento feminista pela justiça da dívida e para tal, a minha primeira questão vai a Chabalala, que é presidente da Rede Parlamentar Africana. Portanto, a primeira questão é como a mídia pode influenciar a percepção pública sobre a dívida e suas implicações para as mulheres, especialmente em países africanos.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think we separated this with Riska and we decided she will focus on that question and that I should focus on why gender at all. I mean, why do we talk gender as a people and as Africans? And I think in responding to that, I want to say we have all been lied to in this room. Well, how much we believed the lies differs according to which culture you were born in and who raised you. But we've all been doomed and convinced that patriarchy is African. And I think the sad thing for me is there are only 3 races on earth, the rest are nations. It shouldn't confuse you. You have the Mongoloid race, that's Asia. You have the Caucasian race, that's white. You have the Negroid race, that's us. If you ask Google now, of the 3 races, which one is more patriarchal, they'll tell you Africans, they have packed patriarchy with us. And we have swallowed patriarchy. And if you look at our history pre-colonially, we are not a patriarchal people. I mean, we don't even have gender grammar. That's why when Africans speak, they say Tom, she, and people say, no, it's a he, and I say, leave them alone. It is not wired within our DNA. We don't have the his, her, he, she. It's just a person. So I think why gender for Africans, it's even, for me, a more pertinent question than the other 2 races. Because to fight for gender equality and equity in this continent is a return to who you are. That's how we are wired as an African. If you look at how they've demarcated time, you have BCE, Christians say before Christ, some of us say before the Common Era. And then you say Anno Domini, that's after Christ, we say Common Era. If you put the 3 races at the table now and you go all the way to BCE, we are the only race in BCE that already produced women in the public office. And I'm not talking just about one type of public office. In the book I've written, I've detailed about 8 types of public office that were occupied by African women, already in BCE times. African women, Yenenga, of the Mosi people, the largest group, she will know, the lady from Burkina Faso, the largest nation group in Burkina Faso was founded by a woman, Yenenga, founded the people, the language, the culture, everything. So I don't want us to look at gender and sniff at it and think it's a United Nations human rights agenda. They found us here practicing gender equity. The stereotype that African men are lazy actually comes from that period. They found the African woman in leadership, leading men, and they thought, look at these lazy men being led by women. And that stereotype has stuck with African men. If you engage any white person, they will say, oh, I prefer the female, their men are lazy. It's because they came here patriarchal and couldn't understand finding such a society of equity where women were in leadership. So I think I'll leave it there. When you find for gender equity in whatever area that you are in, you are not propagating a United Nations human rights agenda. You are returning us to who we are. You are decolonizing our culture, actually. And you are taking us to a post-neoliberal society. So as a journalist, it's even worse because you are a source of information. So if you, the journalist, believes that Africans are patriarchal by nature, it means that's the message you're going to be propagating. You're going to be rubber stamping this stereotype that has stuck with us, that we really need to shake off. I'm hoping that by the end of tomorrow, we would have been convinced and shaken it off, because patriarchy is not just believed by men, it's believed by women themselves. I mean, FGM, by and large, is upheld by grandmothers. It is not the fathers, so we need to shake it off equally. Riska, before I give to you, it's a very nice and golden word, Africans. It's called cognitive dissonance. When you've been lied to so much that even when the truth appears, it cannot dislodge the lie. The truth cannot accumulate enough strength to dislodge the lie that has been put in your head. So let's all fight cognitive dissonance and stop looking at gender as a United Nations human rights agenda or as a dead thing or as an IFF thing. We are not patriarchal by DNA Africans. So let's throw patriarchy with all its tentacles in the dustbin of history. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much, Mamke. It's always hard to follow up on Mamkani Sile, but I want to just start, and I'll introduce myself after this slide. I want to start with this slide, and this is some of the headlines. Just doing a search on women and how they are perceived. So one says, aid to Africa is being cut, but promoting women can make the continent self-sufficient. Women are a third more likely than men to be on exploitative 0-hour contracts. 25 days of debt service payments could emancipate African women from 40 billion hours of water harvesting. Land ownership among indigenous women worryingly low. Unpaid work and domestic labor, the reality of for African women. 12% of working women in South Africa are domestic workers, yet they don't receive proper maternity leave or pay. How women's empowerment drives South Africa's just energy transition. Women spend 30% more out of pocket for health care than men, study finds. So these are just some of the snippets that I found, and this kind of ties in nicely with what Ramkani was saying about how women are then perceived as either on the one end being the linchpin of economic failure, and then also the savior to those economic failure, policy failures. Oh wait, I'm going in the wrong direction, sorry. Oh, how would I need help? Sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name is Riska Portman. I am a policy officer at AfroDad. And I just wanted to discuss today the question that Victoria posed. So what is the voice of the media in advancing the feminist debt justice movement? And Mamkani already started to shape why this conversation is important. And she had shaped the histories of what got us here, right? And so I just want to say, in today's context, why this conversation is important. So as we now know, Africa's in debt distress, right? And we're seeing that women are made to shoulder this burden in terms of the increased care burden and reproductive work. The more time women spend on housework, the less they are able to engage in the economy. And also, when women don't engage in the formal economy, their work is undervalued and underfunded because it's just seen as housework. Caring to kids is seen as something women should do. But there are progressive taxations that can provide resources for care and also climate adaptation. So then the question also then becomes, what is the feminist debt justice movement? So I've just updated my slides here. So this movement stems from the debt justice movement, which you're all very familiar with. And it basically calls for a feminist and gendered lens to understanding of debt and gender, and also the history, the colonial history, and also what has been transplanted to us to shaping our current realities. And so this movement really wants to lay emphasis on the social organization, social, economic, and political organization of care. So how are these responsibilities distributed across individuals, communities, and the state? Where does responsibility lie? It also then makes clear the linkages between debt, austerity, and reproductive work. So austerity is basically fiscal consolidation. It's when our governments tell us we don't have money for hospitals, we don't have money for education, because we are paying so much for debt servicing, right? We are seeing in South Africa, for example, 66 cents of every $1 is spent to debt servicing. Next slide, please. And so the tax justice movement has 4 R's that they usually use to describe the work that we do in the tax justice movement. And the feminist movement has added an extra one, which is reparations. So these, I'll just run through them quickly. And I've put on the other side also what the countries export. And I want us to think about this in light of the contract that Dr. Leila shared with us yesterday. So think about those terms and think about what our countries have, and also the 5 R's. So the first one is raising revenue, and that is basically raising revenue for care. So it's raising taxes, it's raising exports. The second one is redistribution. So this is redistribution of wealth, and this is usually making sure that we close the inequality gap, right? And in South Africa, it's a very large gap that needs to be closed. Repricing, so this is repricing on common bads, such as climate emissions, and the next one is representation. So this is bringing women back to the center of the conversation. This is what the feminist debt justice movement is saying, that women bear the brunt of bad decision making, so bring us back to the center. As Mamska is saying, they found us here making these decisions. And the last one that has been brought in is reparations. Jason spoke about this, he's spoken a lot about this, and this is also the theme this year for the AU. And what does reparations look like? And I think this is a question that journalists can really shape at the national level. So the next slide looks at how does sovereign debt then shape women's lives in Africa and beyond? And the beyond to me is the global south. But yeah. So the first one is with debt, right? We've seen in yesterday's exercise how debt is raised. Also, historically, how debt has been raised in Africa. We've seen failures of IMF policies and also the conditionalities thereof. So the debts we accrue usually come with high interest rates. We've seen yesterday, as an example, 11.75%, incredibly high. The conditionalities that comes with these loans are suicidal, as we described yesterday. So these, in reality, then decrease public spending, and it also weakens the state. It weakens also the social contract between the communities or citizens and the state. And then ultimately this increases the care burden on women. And so this means that when water is polluted, for example, by a mine, women have to walk further and spend more time on collecting water. Women also have to walk further or pay more money on public transport to reach clinics, which are now further away from their homes because there is no public infrastructure is crumbling near to them. And these are some examples of progressive taxation, and these are from another presentation a colleague made last week. And these are at a global level, right? So you're seeing countries like Sweden, France, the UK, Argentina, and you're seeing them implement these progressive taxation. And this is obviously fueled by civil society pushes at their national level. But we we hardly see these things being implemented in Africa. And I think if we go back to yesterday, those terms and conditions and those little clauses and the laws prevent our countries from actually implementing these things. For example, South Africa has used to have a high net worth individuals unit at SARS, the Revenue Authority here. But it's been so weakly implemented, and we know why, right? Because they aren't able to actually at the national level implement these things. And then the next question then becomes, how does the UN Tax Convention, can it advance a gender-just economy? So the UN Tax Convention is the United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. And so this is a very fundamental shift led by the Africa Group and has been championed by the Africa Group at the UN, which fundamentally wants to change how taxes are raised and also decision-making on the tax rules at the global level. And historically, we've been left out of this conversation because these rules are usually made at the OECD, which is a small group of rich countries. And the African group has been so amazing, really historic, in pushing forward this agenda. And so we know that there is about 490 billion US dollars lost annually in tax revenue by multinationals and wealthy individuals. What can 492 billion do for the women of Africa, the women of the global south? So I think that the UN Tax Convention can really push for this change, and but also what we are seeing that the global north don't want, firstly, the tax convention. We're seeing the USA and others push back against, also some African countries at times. But last year we've also seen in a draft proposal of the terms of reference that the gender clause, which this working group that we're speaking about now, the gender debt justice movement pushed so hard for, was completely thrown out. So the onus also then lies on journalists to keep abreast of this, to keep reporting, not only on the UNTC, but also how their country is voting and what this means for women and girls. I'm almost finished. So the call to action is really looking at how can journalists understand what taxes mean. And to me, I think that tax is our superpower, it's our social superpower. By shaping how taxes are raised and spent, we are shaping our lived realities. So I really want us to think about Mamkani's words on how do we center women's voices. But a step back from that is how do we, and especially you in this room, how do you view and internalize women and their role within society? And so I also then want a call to action to be spending time at the national level to investigate local cases of how loans, debt impact women and girls in your communities at the national level, and also then scrutinizing your political elite and economic elites to make those connections. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada. Obrigada mesmo. Agora, como habitual, para quem quiser fazer pergunta aqui às nossas palestrantes, terá que colocar a mão no ar, não é? Colocar a mão no ar e fazerem questões aqui às nossas palestrantes. Mas antes mesmo vou já... Ai, temos muitas mãos no ar. Tá bem, tá bem. Exato. Eu não sei se o tradutor está aqui uma pausa, mas tudo bem. Dizia eu que para quem quiser fazer perguntas às nossas palestrantes, terá que colocar a mão no ar e já temos ali. Eu penso que vamos passar um dos nossos microfones. Eu não sei. Tem microfone? Ok, muito bem, obrigada. E vamos começar com o DJ. O DJ tem aí uma questão a fazer. Colocou primeiro a mão no ar. Por favor. Lá na ponta.
No, I was telling you that we could not hear, so I was just asking you to wait so that the translator...
Estou a falar muito rápido, é isso? O tradutor. Preciso repetir. Ok. Agora já é possível. Obrigada. Dizia eu que para quem quiser fazer perguntas aqui às nossas palestrantes. Ok. Já está, né? Já é possível. Faz favor. Vamos começar então pelo DJ a fazer questão aqui, a pergunta aqui às nossas palestrantes, por favor. Não é? Quem vai fazer, quem quer perguntar alguma questão relativamente ao que as nossas palestrantes falaram aqui ou debruçaram? Ninguém coloca a mão no ar. Tudo bem. Eu vou fazer então uma questão. Ah, sim, temos alguém. Faz favor.
Ok, bonjour, je suis Adama Bakayoko de la Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais que la deuxième intervenante revienne sur la question des taxes. Je n'ai pas bien perçu. Voilà, sur les taxes, la question des taxes. Je n'ai pas bien perçu où elle voulait en venir. En parlant des taxes, il faudrait que les journalistes se penchent beaucoup sur les taxes. Qu'est-ce qu'elle attend justement des journalistes?
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for your question. I think I'll go a little bit slower. The first thing that would be, I think three things, right? The first one being advancing and keeping an eye on UN Tax Convention at the national level. So following how your country votes at the UN and critiquing that, if it's positive or negative, critiquing or praising. Secondly is thinking about how you and your news team view and portray women within your work. So also to center women's voices. And the third thing is to spend more time investigating or connecting the dots between, for example, IMF loan and impacts on the ground.
I think, Riska, that's assuming maybe that people are well conversant with what is the United Nations Tax Convention. So maybe the minor step to what you just elaborated is for people to go back and understand why is the United Nations Tax Convention such a big thing for Africa. Because, I mean, illicit financial flows happen because of tax evasion or tax avoidance, and because we were not participating in formulating or legislating tax laws globally, because that's a conversation that was held outside of us by the OECD body, where yes, we are there, but I mean, our say is not that much because they have conversations before the conversation, because it's been Western dominated. And for the first time, November, it's now year before last already. Year before last November, Africa really came together, something that has eluded us since Nkrumah asked us to unite. For the first time, we came together and we said, we want tax laws to be promulgated at the United Nations, not at all these outside bodies that have says like the C20, whoever, where really our voices are at a lower end. So maybe I think as a journalist, start there, because if you understand the big importance of the UN Tax Convention, you'll then be able to see why we are pushing it as the Africa group. But also how in the end it will bear on illicit financial flows, on debt, and all these other things that are related to domestic resource mobilization.
Vamos dar mais. Aqui esteja à vontade.
Thank you very much. On that tangent of the UN Tax Convention, I wonder what are your thoughts regarding the Trump Executive Order number 1, because it clearly indicated that any jurisdiction which has a tax regime which is perceived to be adversarial to American interests. If you look currently, we have significant economic presence tax being adopted across the continent. Kenya is the latest case. We have minimum top-up tax, and the whole idea is to address the issue of base erosion and profit shifting. So Trump is coming and disturbing that order, and we are here now asking ourselves, what is the eventuality of the UN tax convention?
Well, I think if you go at who voted against it in the very first place here before last, in November, you will understand that for us it is not a shock. We already knew that they are going to put stumbling blocks all the way to its implementation. That's why when the terms of reference were being drafted, we said, Africa again, please come together. We said to civil society organizations, please keep tabs, because they are going to put stumbling blocks for us for this to be implemented. Understand that the issue of taxation, which bears on illicit financial flows, which bears on debt, is what we call neoliberalism or neocolonialism rather, in the first place. That's why we say it's a new way of colonizing. So they already knew when they withdrew the colonial governor and the defense force and whoever, and they said, yeah, you can hoist your flag, you can elect your own people. They already knew that they are just moving the physical embodiment of colonization, but they knew the economic will continue, which is really the basis of it. So we knew that they are going to put these stumbling blocks. That, for me, what you said calls for Africa to unite even more, but more so for the global South to come together, because we are the ones who bear the brunt of debt, of illicit financial flows, of tax evasion and tax avoidance, which for me really are the same thing. For me, from a moral perspective, evasion and avoidance are the same thing. So we knew, and I don't know, this now is a personal opinion. There is no American president who comes just for the sake of, because capital controls America. They control the world, but America is even worse because it is the seat of capital. So every president that comes with, George Bush had no choice but to invade Iraq. Even if he had to concoct a lie, he came to invade Iraq, and he was going to invade Iraq even if he said, I am looking for poppy dolls in Iraq. He would have invaded. So Trump has come, he's doing exactly the things that he came on the ticket for. It is not surprising. He's there to bring glory back to America in whatever way. And he's even contested. This morning, they announced in the news, he's slapping the EU goods with a tariff of 20%. So it's not just us. Trump is there to restore the glory of America. So in that restoration, whoever is in the path, blood will spill on them. But it calls for us, for me, to unite even more. What Trump is doing is forcing us as Africa to realize for the first time what Steve Biko said. He said, black men. Well, I'm a gender activist. I say, black people, you are on your own. Can we stop looking east or south or west and look to ourselves and unite and champion our own agenda? But I'm glad you are raising that, because it just says that this is a war.
Jason wanted to make some inputs also.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll just add a couple of points to what has just been said with regard to the UN Framework Convention on tax. So a couple of things. One is that the process of negotiating the different protocols have already begun. And so procedurally, this process is ongoing, of course, with the position that the US administration has taken. I think there's also a pattern that we need to be, so that's the first point. The process is moving. The second point we need to observe and very quickly get in stride with the current US administration is that to some extent, the bark is louder than the bite, or sharper than the bite. And I think this is a way of trying to grab international attention or distract us from actually what is going on. And if you observe on some of the international aspects, they actually have been reversals that the US administration has taken. And in the case and in the instance of the United Nations, whilst there is this big bold announcement about withdrawing and removing engagement with the United Nations, actually, within the United Nations, they are engaging in some of the processes. It's just that perhaps they are being even more particular in which processes they will engage in that will advance their own interests, as Honorable Kanishile has said. So I do think we also need to be a bit more pragmatic in how we observe the administration with regards to its engagement, particularly with the United Nations. I think on the other issues around tariffs, trade wars, and things like that, the administration is largely neoliberal, it's business-led, so anything that will get parties to the table to negotiate a deal, I think that's the strategy. I think we can observe so far in some of the more bigger dimensions of global political stability or security, it's actually being used as a tool to bring parties to the table to negotiate deals rather than other things like that. So just those two additional points I wanted to make. I'd also encourage us to find Dr. Laila Latif as well, who's here, and she has quite extensive experience working on the UN Framework Convention on Tax, as well as we can also forward some of the questions to our partner organization, Tax Justice Network Africa, that are actually leading a lot of the civil society engagement and support to the Africa group on the negotiations to get more detailed answers on where that process is currently going. Thanks.
Muito obrigada. Nós vamos dar continuidade, mas eu gostaria de agradecer a presença das palestrantes. Penso que temos outras que também vão contribuir com o mesmo tema. Eu gostaria já de convidá-los a ocuparem os vossos lugares, por favor. Sim. Obrigada mesmo. Portanto, eu vou convidar agora... Gostava de uma salva de palmas, por favor. Muito obrigada.